All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. These are educational videos that you'll find will probe topics that you probably are not familiar with, but they might have a big impact on your life. A different way of looking at something. You know, we're going to be doing some Bible decode here, number 271, and we've mostly been exploring the Roman origins hypothesis for the New Testament. That is that the Romans, the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty of Caesars in the late 1st century AD. They're the ones who wrote the New Testament as a piece of wartime propaganda against the Jews, or really a psychological operation against the Jews. The story of Jesus is a psyop, and in my mind, it's pretty obvious. It's a pretty obvious psyop once you start looking at the overwhelming amount of evidence for and the very, zero amount of evidence against, and that I've uncovered anyway. All of the evidence for the existence of Jesus is kind of wiped out by the Roman origins hypothesis, because pretty much everybody that vouched for Jesus was a Roman, a royal member of the Flavian dynasty, or at least a member of a Roman royal family. So they were all in on it. It's kind of like what you're talking about with the Chauncey Billups basketball, the poker games that he involved himself in, where every single person at the table is in on it, except for the one, what do they call him? Not a patsy, but a fish, which is kind of ironic, because the fish is, supposed to be one of the symbols of Jesus, but it's actually, it's a dolphin, and it's when it's paired with an anchor, it is a Flavian symbol, and it's on many of their coins that they minted. Both Emperor Titus and I think Emperor Domitian of the Flavian dynasty has that fish and anchor symbolism that kind of eventually became a fish. But the fish in the basketball scandal is like the one guy at the table that doesn't know what's going on, and everybody else is in on it. And that's kind of what you have when you have all these ancient texts. Almost all of them are written by the Roman royals in one way or another, and some authors, Roman Piso and Abelard Reuchlin, from way back in the 70s and 80s, were figuring out that by kind of decoding the writings of the private writings, the letters that of these royals wrote back and forth, they could figure out the pen names that the various players were using, particularly Arius Piso and his family. That they didn't just write the New Testament, they wrote a lot of other stuff too, that stuff that you would consider to be part of the classics, like Aristotle. And apparently Aristotle was a writer, Greek writer in the 3rd, 4th century BC, but he only wrote like a couple of works, and all the rest of his stuff was written by Arius Piso. Arius Piso wrote Hero of Alexandria, who was this inventor who invented all of these crazy machines that, where you pour you pour water into a you pour water into a pitcher, and it comes out as wine. It comes out the other end as wine, so it's turning water into wine. And he has a lot of other like devices where the churches that they had were really like haunted houses, where it's like they press a button and the curtain goes down or whatever, and so it looks like it's being done by God, but they have such high technology for the time that they're rigging it up, and so they make the church look like a haunted house practically to convert people. It's all very interesting and very compelling. But today we're going into a book that is a little bit out of the bullseye of the Roman origins hypothesis, and more over on the periphery, because it was written at a time where the Roman origins hypothesis was very, very obscure. Now it's just slightly obscure, especially with the writing of Caesar's Messiah by Joseph Atwill, and now the new book, Christianity's Origin as a Flavian Secrecy Cult by Michael Menescotts, that just came out last year. But we're reading from Robert Eisenman, who was a theologian, historian, but key to making sure that the Dead Sea Scrolls would be distributed to the public, translated and disseminated, because the custodians of the Dead Sea Scrolls, since they were discovered in the late 40s and 50s, they were sitting on the texts, and they were not translating them, they were not sharing them, and they sat on them for like almost 40 years. And so it was until the 80s, the late 80s, that these things saw the light of day. I think that's just an utter crime. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in Qumran, which is about 20 miles from Jerusalem, approximately southeast of Jerusalem, and right on the Dead Sea. There is a bunch of caves there, but there are also like kind of a fortress or a monastery where these very pious Jews lived in kind of an ascetic type of situation. They believed in, eating clean and no sex. All the children were adopted. And they had really strict rules. And when the Romans, as part of the war against the Jews, kind of sacked Qumran, they hid all of their extensive literature in these caves. And they weren't discovered for almost 1900 years. And among the books are all of the books of the Bible, of the Old Testament. Genesis, like 20 copies of Genesis, multiple copies of most of the books. I believe the only book that's missing is the book of Esther. But then that material isn't so interesting to scholars because, except for to antiquity, because these are the oldest Old Testament documents that exist by hundreds of years. But that still exist. And but the explosive stuff is the sectarian material, the material that is specific to this particular sect of pious Jews. And that is what Eisenman gets into a lot here in this book, which is called The Dead Sea Scrolls and the First Christians. Eisenman and other scholars are claiming that the Dead Sea Scrolls were written right at the same time of Jesus' life, and And they are telling that story. Whereas these Dominican priests who originally had custody of the documents, they were trying to push the story as far away from Jesus as they could. And so they were claiming that the documents were really from the 2nd century BC. And so we're reading from one of Eisenman's short books that's included in this collection of the Dead Sea Scrolls and the First Christians, which is called Maccabees, Zadokites, Christians, and Qumran. And he's going to talk about the Zadokites here. We're about to start chapter 2, called the Zadokite priesthood. The scrolls have delineated what a Zadokite priesthood has to have been from the 2nd century BC onwards. He's talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls. Though there might be a genealogical component to this conception, its main thrust is qualitative, namely those who keep the covenant or follow the law. Primarily, the Zadokite priesthood must relate, as the Damascus document explicitly denotes, to the book of Ezekiel, where it was first introduced. And so the Damascus document is one of these sectarian documents from the Qumran dwellers. In Ezekiel, the priests, who are the Bray Zadok Levites, so like the priesthood, kept charge of my sanctuary, i.e. kept the covenant, while the sons of Israel went astray from me. Now, it's hard to read Eisenman because he has so many parentheticals and so many asides that it's hard to convey it verbally. And then also he has extensive footnotes, and he carries on kind of an argument in the footnotes as well. Now, for this reading, we're just going to, unless there's something really glaring in the footnotes, we're just going to plow through without delving into the footnotes. So at least we can get the surface level here, because Eisenman's writing is pretty advanced you know, for a specialized audience. And you know, maybe the second time we go through it, then we'll look at the footnotes and study those. Okay, that there may be a genealogical connotation to this description is self-evident. However, it is also clear from studying Ezekiel's account, whether authentic or pseudepigraphic is beside the point, that there are other priestly Levites, members of families as respectable as Shaphan's, who was involved in the reform of Josiah, these comprising the former reigning priestly aristocracy, doubtless could have made equally legitimate Zadokite claims, though it is not clear that such claims counted for anything before the Restoration, and are now being disqualified on the basis of their idolatry, etc., from service in the temple. The Dead Sea Scrolls further emphasize the ethical aspect of Ezekiel's usage. As they employ this terminology, it definitely has a component in righteousness, which is, of course, the root of the personal noun, Zadok, or in observation of the law, what in other language might be characterized as zeal for the law, phraseology current at Qumran. It cannot be stressed too strongly that this moral component is the absolute determinant of a proper Zadokite priest, at least as far as the Damascus document is concerned, and probably Ezekiel as well. The play on words implicit in this esoteric analysis of the term constitutes a favorite device at Qumran. The artful craftsmanship practiced there is missed by many Qumran scholars who do not adequately come to grips with literary devices in such an environment. This play on words is reinforced in the conjunction of the Moreh ha-Zedek with the, quote, son of Zadok, or more precisely, the Zadok par excellence. It is extended even further in the Pesherim, where the identification is always consciously and explicitly drawn between the Zadok in the text and the Moreh ha-Zadok in the exegesis. Okay. What would Jesus' relationship be to the kind of ideology we are developing here? According to perhaps the oldest and probably most Jewish stratum of New Testament Christology, Jesus was the suffering just one, i.e. the suffering Zadok, and is specifically so designated in Acts. The origin of this phraseology is the suffering servant simile of Isaiah 53. Now, if I'm not mistaken, Isaiah is in like 3 sections, and it looks like it has 3 separate authors from 3 separate time periods. I think it's only the first 48 verses, 48 chapters of Isaiah that are legit, and then the rest of them are written by 2 separate redactors, or people who altered it, which I believe the third installment was written by Arius Piso, because the Romans had control over the Jewish scribes. Now, it's usually considered that the Septuagint was written in the 3rd century BC, but Roman Piso presents a lot of evidence that the Septuagint was written right here at this time by the same people who wrote the New Testament, in the late 1st century. And they altered a good amount of the kind of details of the Old Testament. And the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Old Testament scriptures. And so they put into Greek what is not in Hebrew in many cases. Okay, so I'm not sure about Isaiah 53, but he's talking about the suffering servant simile of Isaiah 53. Here it should be noted, not only is the servant identified with the Zadok, but his justifying action is to be accomplished by his knowledge, probably through teaching of that da'at, widespread at Qumran. Now, da'at is, I thought it meant abyss, and that it is the abyss fractal, or the abyss sephiro of, or lack of sephiro, whatever, of the Kabbalah. The one that's identified as the abyss. That I understand that Sephiro means psychic powers, not necessarily knowledge, but psychism. Being able to bend spoons and to be clairvoyant and to do mind over matter with your mind, but that's not knowledge, and it doesn't have anything to do with knowledge. So I think that Kabbalists either got it wrong or Eisenman's getting it wrong here. And his Emal Nefesh, that is, works of with soteriological force, which is a word that I just looked up in the dictionary like a couple days ago, and I think it means having to do with your salvation. This Yazdic Zadic theology of Isaiah 53 is not only recognizable in the Pauline corpus, it is also present in the Damascus document and the Qumran hymns. By extension, it is also present working off the word Emal, A-M-A-L, in recognizably parallel fashion in the Habakkuk Pesher and the letter of James. However, Paul parts company with these on whether this justification is to be achieved by faith or through works of righteousness and the law. According to the esoteric interpretation of the Zadokite priesthood, as we have expounded it, since Jesus was Zadok, to his heirs belong the high priesthood. The wordplay we have already signaled is further extended in the letter of the Hebrews, with the allusion to the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek. And you can see that Melchizedek kind of ends with Zadok. Now, Melchizedek was a friend of Abraham's who built Jerusalem. Before it was called Jerusalem, it was just called Salem. So that's probably why you recognize the name. Now, in a lot of New Age circles, Melchizedek is a type of wizard that is the same character, but he is given a lot of magical powers. The reference here is not only to the concept of righteousness as being the primary basis of legitimacy in the succession, but also to the personality of the righteous priest, King Jesus, in whose name the new order is established. I'm scrolling the wrong way. Okay, here we go. Here, it should not be forgotten that the title, the Zadok, was also accorded to Jesus' brother James, who was on this basis, in addition to being Jesus' genealogical successor, his spiritual heir. Early church literature, whether through overenthusiasm or otherwise, depicted James as having worn the breastplate of the high priest and actually entering the Holy of Holies. Whether this priesthood of Jesus and James was also the Zadokite one is debatable. In terms of the analysis we have presented of righteousness or the righteous one being the basis for the esoteric understanding of Ezekiel's prognoses, it was. Through this analysis also, sense can be made of the testimony referred to above of James actually functioning as high priest. Whether the Maccabean priesthood of the Most High God is also to be identified with the Melchizedek one of Christianity and the letter to the Hebrews remains open to question. Whether this latter usage of the term can be extended to the Qumran or Zadokite use of the term as well has been debated. The writer would take a position in the affirmative, considering all such juxtapositions of the letter ZDK to be interrelated. In this regard, it should be remembered that the formula men of the lot of Melchizedek of 11 Q Melchizedek. So that was discovered in the cave number 11 of the Qumran dig. So that must have been one of the documents of the Dead Sea Scrolls. Men of the lot of Melchizedek of 11Q Melchizedek corresponds almost precisely to the terminology sons of Zadok in the Damascus document, and therefore by simple reduction, Zadok and Melchizedek are equivalent usages. Finally, if there is substance to any of these extensions and identifications, the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek must be related to what we have called the zealot, based on the zeal of Phinehas, and invoked on behalf of Simeon the righteous, Mattathias and Onias in the Hebrew version of Ecclesiasticus, 1st and 2nd Maccabees respectively. Ecclesiasticus is another, I believe it's apocryphal, but it's an early, I thought it was a 1st century text, 1st century BC. Maccabees at 1st and 2nd are first century BC. Correspondingly, J. Bowman has argued in a much overlooked article on this subject that the Zadokite one bases its claims for legitimacy on this self-same covenant of Phinehas. So those are all from the Apocrypha. By now, it should be clear that these are not all separate reckonings, but rather esoteric or poetic variations around the same theme, righteousness and or zeal, just as the various appellations the community at Qumran used to refer to itself. For example, the sons of light, sons of truth, sons of Zadok, sons of Zedek, sons of Hesed. And that Hesed refers to the fourth sphere on the Kabbalah, Sephiroth. The Ebianim, the elect of righteousness, the meek, Ebianai Hesed, the poor ones of piety, is what that means. And Nimbaret Zedek, the zealous for righteousness. Tamimai Derek, which means the perfect of the way. And Ansher Tamim Ha-Kodeth, the men of the perfection of holiness, etc. So these are all phrases that are used liberally at Qumran in the various documents, the sectarian particularly, that have been discovered. These do not all designate different groups, but function as interchangeable metaphors. In this view, the covenant of Phinehas operated over and above the general Aaronite one, setting forth which among the various Aaronite heirs, Aaron being the brother of Moses, the various Aaronite heirs could be considered suitable candidates for the high priesthood, that is, the zealous or righteous ones. It is significant that one of the original demands at the time of the first uprising in 4 BC, inspired according to Josephus by the zealots, was to appoint according to the law a high priest of more perfect purity. Now keep in mind that Josephus was a Flavian, meaning he was a member of the court of the Romans, the Caesars of the Flavian dynasty. Even though he was a Jew originally, he defected according to his autobiography. He defected to the Romans and became one of the court historians there, and was actually adopted by Emperor Vespasian. That story is enough to make you wave a red flag and maybe look a little bit deeper and really not only question the writings of Josephus, but question his very existence. But according to Joseph, but Eisenman doesn't know that, and basically very few other scholars do either. Josephus is really kind of like the main source for history of the first century. The New Testament is probably the second main source for it. So given that both of these are part of a psychological operation, we're fortunate that the Dead Sea Scrolls showed up when they did, because they fill a big vacuum, if they are to be trusted. Now, the Dead Sea Scrolls are much less likely to at least be Roman, given that they're mostly in Hebrew, whereas Josephus and the New Testament is in Greek. So that's well within the grasp of the Romans, but not so much the Aramaic speakers of Judea. But this Aramaic and Hebrew, Aramaic is very close to Hebrew. So, the Dead Sea Scrolls are much more likely, in my view, to be legitimate than these Greek texts. For their part, according to Josephus, by the Zealots, the uprising in 4 BC was to appoint, according to the law, a high priest of more perfect purity. For their part, it was the messianically inspired, zealous young priests who, by stopping sacrifice on behalf of the Romans, gave the signal for the start of the uprising in 66 CE, which was the major war between the Romans and the Jews, that both Emperor Vespasian and Emperor Titus were both generals in that war. And this was really kind of the main thrust for them to write the Gospels. Because they didn't want another uprising like this. Even though they decimated the Jews, they knew how resilient they were. Commentators who cannot make a determination as to whether the Dead Sea Scrolls sect was anti-Herodian or pro-Herodian, pro-Hyrcanus or pro-Aristobulus, and consequently are unable, for instance, to make any sense out of the destruction of the community in the 40s or 30s